Welcome everybody to the Tuesday edition of the Not Your Average Investor Show. You have been hearing a ton about all this stuff happening in downtown Jax. We had a special breaking news edition on it on Thursday, talking about Gateway JAX, the Pearl District, this beautiful new district coming into like the northern core of downtown Jacksonville that's going to change the game economically for downtown, for real estate investors around the area. So today we are going to have the CEO, the man that is in charge of making it all happen, a man of many talents, which you will soon see, to talk about this. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez. Our guest of honor today is a guy that has been doing this. This is what he does, folks. He has developed downtown Tampa, the water district down there. He helped with the development of the HQ2 real estate project in Washington, D.C. Now he has been recruited to Jacksonville like a five-star recruit, picked out the perfect guy to bring this here from Colorado. He's a University of Colorado Buffalo. Just found out having a nice little season over there. Bryan Moll, welcome to the show, my friend. Say hello to everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Pablo, for having me.
Yeah, man. Pumped to get into this with you. Also, our phenomenal community manager. We call her MTM because she brings us the moments that matter. Anything that you need in the chat, any help that you might need, reach out to her in there. And also, because we call her Madison the Magnificent. Say hello, Madison.
Hi, everybody.
Good to have you all with us today. You know, we've seen the podcast numbers are going up. The YouTube numbers are going up. That's telling me that you are all tuning in. You're not just here live. And for our big audience that's starting to grow on the podcast, that's starting to grow on YouTube, just a little tip for you. If you go to nyais.com, you will notice that this is a live show with a live audience. We have often 60, 70, 80 people here joining in, part of the conversation, making friends with each other. So if you go to nyais.com, you can join us live here on a Tuesday or Thursday at 12:30, and you can be part of a little tradition that we kick the show off with. Bryan, you remember what we kicked the show off with? The roll call, man.
Roll call.
Let's go. We got our leadoff hitter, John Hannon, kicking us off. We got Laura Colby is back from Washington State. Good to have you, Laura. We got Chris Lee from Fernandina Beach. We got the ringmaster of the Not Your Average Investor Show community, Drew Barnell. We got Tony D in the house, Anthony Ditta, MVP Lee Bishop, MVP of the community, saying hello, everybody. The Shaw man of the Not Your Average Investor Show community, Nadeem Shah from the Pacific Northwest, joining us. Good to have you, Nadeem. Our regulars, the second family of the Not Your Average Investor Show, Rosalind and Gary Riley from Marietta, California. We regard you as a family. Good to have you. We got the mountain man from the mountains of Colorado, from your area. Well, not exactly where you're from, since you're from Northeast Colorado. Billy Green in the house from the mountains of Colorado, always checking in. Good to have you. Saying go see you. His alma mater as well. You're in good company. We got Glenn Schenkin from Western Massachusetts. Glenn, that's a new name. Welcome to the show. Make yourself comfortable. Make a friend in here. We got Ken and Carolyn Meline, the first family of the Not Your Average Investor Show community. We salute you. We got the patron Santorios of the community, Michael Santorios from Northern Virginia. Who else we got here in the house? Dean Curry, already said him. Christopher Lee, Cody Adams, the mama bear of the marketing team out here. Good to have you, Cody. The maven from the mountains of Denver as well, Leslie Wilson. We got a good Colorado representation. I forgot to tell you that here, Bryan. You're right at home with your brother in here. Who else? Glenn Schenkin. Good to have you. Oh, Aaron O'Neill, into the lights. Aaron, love it when you check in with us. I appreciate it. All right, let's kick this thing off. Bryan, I kind of, this is a big, complicated project with a lot of moving parts. So I kind of wanted to see if you can simplify it down for us. When your mother tells her friends how proud she is of her boy Bryan, what is she telling them that you're doing these days?
I was actually just thinking about this over the weekend. When I was a little kid, I loved the built environment, and it's something I've been passionate about doing, my entire life. And I looked it up in my old high school yearbook. My mom and dad had written in there, today you're building with blocks. Tomorrow you used to be building with blocks, and tomorrow you're going to be building cities. And I truly believe it's obviously not building a brand new city, but it's really helping, in this case, transform a city into something, better. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I do, and that's what, that's how I describe it.
That's awesome, man. And I gotta think, right? We read your resume, right? You've had a couple stints in DC doing some meaningful things. You've done Tampa as well. When you think of yourself as a city builder, yes, Jacksonville is already here, but the blank canvas that you get here in downtown, I have to assume is pretty unique. Had you in DC or Tampa, had you stepped into like this much space and this much kind of like canvas, or is it pretty similar to what you've done before in those places?
I think each project, each development that I've worked on is unique. So yes, this is different. It's unique. When I first started out in real estate development, I was in DC after CU Boulder. I moved out to DC and very quickly got involved in real estate development with a private equity real estate developer out there called JBG Smith. And myself, along with other colleagues over the 10 years that I was there, really focused and became experts, if you will, in the field of urban redevelopment placemaking. And generally that is retail, likely retail anchored, sometimes grocery stores, but sort of like providing everyday needs for everyone as part of a mixed use project. And at the time we were doing that in DC, that was very unique, especially in the city of DC. It had been, that a lot of that had been built out in the suburbs.
What year are we talking about? What kind of era?
This would have been 2006.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So there had been, for those of you that are familiar with DC, there had been a couple of the neighborhoods that, had seen a little bit of development. There was the Logan Circles, DuPont Circles of the world, where there had been a little bit of development, but you didn't have to go too far outside of that. And there was a lot of underinvestment in those neighborhoods for a long time. And so when we went into the Shaw neighborhood and started making investments in that neighborhood and proposed mixed use, big mixed use projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a lot of people probably thought we were crazy for doing it because we were the first movers. But we really helped transform, those neighborhoods in DC into, walkable, thriving areas. And that was unique in that, DC has been around for a long time. And in DC, there was a lot of like small little parcel assemblages and what we were doing hadn't been done in significant scale. So it was relatively new. You fast forward to Tampa, that had its own set of opportunities and challenges. That was not only an area that had been underinvested in a long time, but it also didn't even resemble a city in the area where we were working. There was an arena where the Tampa Bay Lightning play, but there essentially was just parking lots, dirt parking lots, and a gigantic highway separating the central business district from this area. So in that instance, we had to completely redo the road grid, bring it back to what resembled sort of the more urban road grid, and then create, that was actually creating in many ways its own kind of mini city because it was so separated from a lot of the existing development. Jacksonville is very unique because we have scale. We have over 22 acres of real estate across 20 city blocks. But it's within the urban fabric, which is one of the reasons why I love the opportunity. So you've got very walkable streets for those city planning nerds out there like myself. The blocks are like 200 by 300 feet. And when you're a pedestrian, those feel really good when you're walking from block to block. You get to some cities, just unfortunately, by the way that we're programmed, have these very long blocks, and they're really tough to make, feel good. So you already have the building blocks of this really great infrastructure. The tree, I say this all the time, but the tree canopy really surprised me. And the historic buildings that existed downtown. One thing that's very different from downtown Jacksonville to downtown Tampa is that there's still a lot of historic building stock, and we can thank a lot of the people before us, obviously, that worked to implement some changes that allowed for maintaining that historic building stock. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I think the really great opportunity here, which is totally unique to anything I've done, is that we are stitching a lot of the different areas of downtown back together. And that's really exciting because that means not only do we have the opportunity to be successful in what we're doing, but the investment that we're making, the city is making, has the opportunity to spread, very easily into adjoining spaces and neighborhoods.
Interesting, man. I'm super into what you're talking about, right? I don't know if I've told you this, but my wife is an architect with a master's in urban design, right? So like we talk about this stuff all the time, right? Like we're always talking about how the built environment has this effect on your mood, your quality of life, whether it's a building from like a singular building standpoint, architecture, to the urban design kind of feeling of what you're talking about, these like wide sidewalks, tree canopy, attachments to open spaces. And to iterate back to kind of what I was asking you of, are you used to having an open canvas this big? Because we always talk about downtown Jacksonville as this big canvas, but it sounds like you've been in more wide open spaces, right? Like that Tampa arena sounds like it was just like one big parking lot that you manufactured a small city out of. It's, like essentially, right?
Plus or minus, right?
To the excitement of what you said, right? This stitching of urban fabrics together gives you kind of like this opportunity to become a connector, not just like a fabricator, but a connector of these spaces to enhance this livable experience in downtown. You want to tell us a little bit about what that stitching that you're doing is? Give us a little bit about this Pearl District. We had a show on it with Alex on Thursday, but not everybody was there. Right. Give us kind of like a high level view of what you were putting in and where.
Okay. So again, our holdings total over 20 blocks in 22 total acres. But realistically, that's a lot to develop all at once. It just wouldn't make sense to put that all into production at once. And so, when I first started over a year ago, we hired a great team, some of what I consider to be the best minds in planning, architecture, real estate. A guy named two in particular that came on board very early, David Manfredi, who's the head of a group called Elkis Manfredi out of Boston. I've worked with him in DC near Amazon's HQ2, and then in Tampa. And I knew that he would start to look at the opportunity in Jacksonville and immediately just have some gut reactions. Well, it turns out he actually had worked in Jacksonville a number of years ago. So he was familiar with the city, and the very first thing he said is, "Wow, that place has so much opportunity." Immediately, he hopped on board. We started looking at the real estate that the fund already owned and controlled, the Gateway JAX owned and controlled through the fund. And very quickly, he looked at what we're calling the Pearl District as an opportunity to create, again, I talked about stitching, the sort of fabric of downtown back together in certain areas. And it's only one block from, the very heart of downtown Jacksonville, City Hall, James Weldon Johnson Park, less than 10-minute walk to the water and everything that's happening there and all the city investment that's being put into place there. And just very quickly, we realized that needed to be the place where we started. It is in the North Core neighborhood, which is it's the neighborhood downtown that is immediately adjacent to the city center, the central business district. And it's 5 blocks in this first phase. The investment fund that owns this real estate initially purchased a couple of properties from the First Baptist Church, and one of those was an existing parking garage. And there's a lot of existing parking that's underutilized in downtown Jacksonville. And we use that as this opportunity to help us build a lot of real estate without having to overbuild parking. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, you're going to have enough. And the answer is, just so everyone knows, yes, we're going to have enough. But it really allowed us to think, on the scale of, of a city, of a neighborhood, about how it all works together. One of the other major components that we're building, then this all has to work together really for it to be successful. People need to live downtown. That really helps establish an 18-hour-a-day vibrancy. Right now there's a lot of office space, hardly any residential, especially in the neighborhood where we're building. But people only want to live in a place that has great amenities, places that they can go to eat, go to shop, grocery stores, some of the basics. And you got to build it all together, and you got to build it all at scale. So in addition, I mentioned the parking garage, but we've got 3 multifamily buildings, over 1,000 units, 120,000 square feet of grocery anchored retail. And then we've got one site in the Pearl Street district that we're reserving for either a 4th residential building or potentially a hotel.
essentially you are describing bringing in the entertainment, bringing in the things that people like to do, the essential services that people need, bringing in residents, and even bringing in hospitality, all in a short amount of span, all in a small span of time, into this like North Core district. That's essentially right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in this first phase is going to have what we're calling a festival street that is really at the heart of this, this project. And, I took inspiration from a few different projects, that I both have worked on, and then also I just know really well, one of which is Larimer Square in Denver, which there are certainly differences there. Larimer Square, for those of you from Colorado out there that probably know that well, that was one of the first redevelopment areas of downtown Denver in Lodo, which is lower downtown in Denver. And it's only one city block. Now the transformation is spread out, very far away from there. But that one city block really helped to transition that, or transform that area of downtown. And they did it by creating a lot of great outdoor spaces, good food and beverage, restaurants, and they would use that street as a festival street, lots of fairs, different functions, farmers markets, that type of thing. And that's been done in a number of different areas. And so we took a lot of inspiration from those types of places. And that, the key to making a really great place isn't just, residential, although it's very important. It's not just hotels or entertainment. All that's very important, but it's also creating a community space where people can gather and feel part of something.
Yeah, man, it's become almost like a trope on this show how I compare everything to Miami just because I'm from there, and I lived the urbanization of Miami twice, essentially, right? Like I remember in the early aughts, right? Like kind of right around the time when you were in DC, when downtown Miami was, Brickell was heavily densifying, and everybody was talking about these things of like, we're gonna have all this mixed use stuff. That's the first time I started hearing those concepts. And then back in like 2010 through 2018, I lived in Wynwood as that whole area started really developing, and I was fortunate enough to be at the heart of it. But what you're describing to me is that exact formula, the formula of mixed use building where a space goes from being mostly only used on weekdays from 9 to 5 because there's a bunch of office buildings there, and that's where that density is. And in order to bring people there, you got to build residents. You got to build services for those residences, and you got to build entertainment for people to like come like and experience it, to then decide that they want to move there. And then the piece de resistance is something that I also very much lived, which was what made Wynwood really work was the deliberate creation of these like public spaces, right? Like as Americans, we're so, I feel like you go to Europe and you're just like, I don't know what it is that I love about this area, but it's like, it's all these things, right? It's mixed use, it's densification. And then there's also the town square where everybody mixes. And every time I've ever seen a developer take that extra step to say, you know what, I can give up some like leasable square footage to create this town square kind of area that can be used for many things, and it's going to attract people as an attraction. It seems to make all the real estate around it truly, truly pop. It sounds like that's what Lerner Square was. For me, it was the Wynwood Walls and the Wynwood Yard. You see it in other places. Is that something, talk to me a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical. I mean, I've been asked the question, why has it, when a lot of peer cities to Jacksonville have redeveloped, why has it taken so long in Jacksonville? Why hasn't it happened? And I think there probably are a lot of reasons, and so I don't mean to simplify it to just a handful, but one of the more important ones, in my opinion, is the scale to be able to do that. When you're building a single building on a parcel, you may not be able to have frankly the economic freedom when you're trying to put that, build that project, put that deal together, to be able to do something like that. It's not a big enough project that one deal can't, essentially shoulder the cost of doing something unique and special. a lot of times public investment comes in and helps with that. And certainly we're looking to partner with the city to help make this happen. But the unique scale that we have allows us to do something really interesting and frankly critical, like Pearl Square. And, I think if you don't create that special place for not just the people that live there or dining or whatever, but for people from surrounding neighborhoods to come in and enjoy, you're just creating a whole bunch of buildings. You're not creating a neighborhood.
Yeah, totally, man. I love it. I love it. And Lee's got a question about those buildings. Was everything already mapped out, outdoors and earmarked before you came on board, or were you were you involved with the design of like where to stick the pins on the map and guiding things for this thing?
Yeah, there had been, so Alex, who probably talked a little bit about this on Thursday, Alex had started to assemble some property downtown, and he had some really good ideas on how those properties could work. So when I came on board, we had a lot of conversations about some of his ideas. He had also hired, some really great consultants that had been working on the project. I had the very unique opportunity, actually, frankly, not knowing a lot about Jacksonville, but having a lot of very relevant recent experience to take a big step back. And, over the time that Alex put a lot of the properties together and then, we were able to go out and assemble a few other pieces, really just take a brand new look at everything, at how everything could work together. And we ended up I'll take the Porterhouse site, for example. That's a 200-unit project right next to the Porterhouse Mansion, which JWB owns and renovated a few years ago. And, Alex had, basically working with his team, thought that would be a great multifamily building with ground floor retail, and that's what we're proposing. I think the idea of Pearl Square is, A, being the first phase and, B, the scale of that, and then how that's all functioning, that came into play, again, and I certainly can't take the credit for it because it was about the team's ideas and, just there's a lot of iterating, this wasn't just like one point we may have had an aha moment, but it wasn't, perfect the first time. There's a lot of back and forth with our team and our designers, but we think we came up with a pretty good end result.
Yeah, man, for sure. After seeing the big reveal and the really cool activation that y'all put together of going to like the different corners with the iPad and being able to see it kind of like, I guess it's not technically mixed reality, but I don't know. What do you call that technology?
Well, it's not initially. I'm glad you brought that up because that was something, technology is amazing when it works, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, what happens if there's a glitch on the iPad, and people get, so no, it really worked. It went off without a hitch, but we're just calling that a 360 experience. There's new technology that we're going to implement as we start to, do more and more projects called augmented reality, which basically you could just pull up your phone and, download an app and basically get to see from where you're standing, anywhere from where you're standing, be able to see what it's going to look like. So we're excited to advance that technology too.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to move into the kind of like the whole economic development, real estate valuation piece. But while we're on this part, just because it's tangentially related, we hit on this a little while ago, right before we got in here. But part of your job, I guess, has to be becoming familiar with the technology that you can use to then make it visible for people, to gain consensus, to satisfy the very different stakeholders that you have. And I was just kind of joking with you about like how in your role, there's maybe only like public company CEOs that have more stakeholders. Can you talk about how you see kind of like the things that you need to do and the things you need to be able to, how many people you got to, kind of like take into account in order to pull off a project like this in a way that you would deem as successful?
There are, we had been talking about this. There are a lot of stakeholders in every project that I've worked on. This is even in what we call greenfield development. So if you are out, in the suburbs building on, new dirt, you still have stakeholders there. But especially when you're in an urban area, you're doing redevelopment. there are people that live there, the people who work there, let alone the city officials and other groups that have an interest. And I think, the most important thing is trying to build consensus. You're not always going to make everyone happy, but trying to build consensus among what people want and would like to see in a development that's in their city, in their neighborhood. That's fundamentally what I think is really important about doing these, and also we're a fiduciary to our investors, investment. And so it's balancing. And by the way, I think these are all, we're all swimming in the right direction on this with building consensus in the community and returning our investors a good return. Because when you do things that are really great for the community and they're successful, that also has a good return on it. So, I think building consensus is one of the more important things that I do day to day. And there's a lot that goes into it. You had mentioned, when we were having the conversation before this, there are like political elements to it for sure. But you also have to be able to listen to people and hear what they're saying. And if there are certain, elements of retail or design or, things that they want to see, it's also taking those words and figuring out how to incorporate them.
I like that, man. And I did say political element, and what I think it's more what you said, it's consensus building, right? Like you're one part urban planner, one part money guy, one part operational, whatever, but always a consensus builder is what it sounds like. And there's a question in the chat that says, so making majority happy with the project is key, ? And I wonder if you can expand on the idea, what the difference is in your head between making the majority happy and building consensus.
They're not mutually exclusive by any means, but, I think building consensus is, when I hear making the majority happy, I think that's a little bit more black and white than what I think consensus building is, which is trying to find, it's trying to take input that people are giving you and, incorporating into what we're doing. And it doesn't mean, if someone likes blue, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of our buildings are going to be blue, but we got to figure out why blue is really important to that person and figure out how meaningfully to incorporate. I'm just obviously using color as an example, but there are a lot of, public spaces, for example, where, the public spaces that we've proposed so far, we're looking to get public input on that as we move through our process. What do people, we think in our design team has put together some really great thoughts, ways that we can activate those spaces through, yoga and again, more festivals, those types of things. But, through our meetings with community members, council members, public officials, the community itself, there might be some really great ideas and figure out how we can incorporate that into the public spaces.
I love that, man. And I'm glad that whoever asked that question checked in with a text. So it just says not your average guest. So I can't give you credit unless you tell me who you are, but I think it's such an important piece to this idea of creating win-wins, that somebody sees himself as a consensus builder, right? Like Leslie's in the chat talking about how Lerner Square has had this transition where these like state developers are now kind of like trying to do this thing that's upsetting a whole bunch of people. And yet we always talk about the fact that aligned incentives here is really what creates great business models that create win-wins, like JWB being vertically integrated and being the person that sells you the property, manages the asset, manages the relationship for a long time. And then on top of that, invest in downtown because they're invested in this city, and just how that creates great scenarios. And it sounds like they went out and got a guy to lead this thing that believes that same thing, that believes this idea that you want to get people to enroll into this big project and be pumped about it, much more so than just like getting it done and pushing it through, which I think is great.
Totally. I totally agree. I think, yeah. And just a quick shout out really quickly to our sponsors, JWB and DLP Capital. They have, they share, I think, the belief that we have to be consensus builders, that we're building, in a city that's there and in neighborhoods that are there with people that already live and work near there. And, that's really special and unique to have too.
Totally. I love it, man. I often, again, contrast it to Miami, where like all these like out of state developers, these people with very short kind of life cycles and trying to make money and rip it out, and
Yeah.
get out, have built something that people don't, like it's great for out of towners, but it
Well,
hasn't been that great.
Sorry to interrupt, Pablo. I was just
Yeah.
going to say, I mean, that, one of the challenges, honestly, is, for some people, like developer is a 4-letter word, and so to
True.
come in as someone that's trying to think outside of the box on how you put all this together and make it successful. Some people, are a little suspect, and that's okay. I think, that's something that, is par for the course. And I understand why, because there are people out there, like you mentioned, Miami, Miami is an example, but there are a lot of those examples everywhere where, you don't necessarily get the quality that enhances neighborhoods.
Yeah. I love it, man. So let's talk about that quality of it. Not to add more stakeholders to your plate, but we've got 63 folks here. Most of us are investors in Jacksonville, right? Most of us own this like workforce housing around the urban core or are curious with it or whatnot, right? Most of us here are not going to be, ponying up $1 million to throw into the fund and be a part of this. But if you could tell us a little bit about your work in DC, that sounded like you were, stitching a neighborhood too and creating an economic windfall. Can you tell us a little bit about how that went for the city and surrounding area and how that's going?
Well, I think the immediate impact of some of those projects was significant. There were 3 projects where we introduced grocery stores into food deserts, and that has the ability to be very transformative. In fact, one of the things we're going to be doing in the Pearl District is bringing a grocery store into relatively significant food desert. So when some of those initial big moves make very significant, enhancements to neighborhoods. And then over time, as those neighborhoods start to mature, you start thinking about more than just providing sort of the everyday needs, but the other, the other things that we all enjoy, concert venues, for example, could be one where it's not something that you necessarily would dedicate a very large space for when you're trying to do, relatively simple things like bring a grocery store downtown and have some, good restaurants and maybe some, fitness spaces and then services. But that's something, as an example, that's something we're thinking about. We did in DC, per your question, and we're also thinking about doing in future phases of Jacksonville. It's just thinking about, well, what's next? And that, that is really what happened in DC is the neighborhoods, for those of you familiar with DC, 14th Street, just north of Logan Circle, the U Street, Shaw neighborhood, down by the ballpark, all neighborhoods that I was involved in where we helped create a bear there. The initial development created those sort of first, sort of initial like everyday needs. And then those neighborhoods have really started to mature with new development. And, you get more amenities because of that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. How would you describe kind of like the neighborhood that you developed there and the surrounding neighborhoods before you got there to like where it's at now, 20 years later, right?
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you an example. Well, probably a couple of good examples, but I'll take the 14th Street neighborhood. There was a grocery store that had been built just in between Logan Circle and DuPont Circle, just north of the White House, basically about a mile north of the White House. And we didn't do that, but that was arguably one of the first big investments that had happened near us. Most of our real estate was still another, 3/4 of a mile away from that. So too far to walk really with groceries every day. So we utilized a lot of that progress, built another grocery store, Trader Joe's, thousands of multifamily units. And, that really stimulated, again, like I think it's going to happen in Jacksonville, stimulated other development to happen next to it. So where that Trader Joe's is today on 14th and U Street, there literally are probably 5,000 multifamily units that have been built within a 1/4 mile of that. I mean, it really was. And again, the credit can be shared with the people that were before us and went right after us, but I do think having a transformational project like we built on that corner with a grocery store, that helped really pave the path to more private and public investment in the neighborhood to the point today where it's a thriving neighborhood in downtown DC.
Yeah, for sure. Which is kind of to the Michael Santorez's question of, do you anticipate more high-rise condominiums and rental apartment developments similar to Tampa and the Amazon HQ areas? Sounds like that. That's a resounding yes. You essentially answered that ahead of time, right? Like you're expecting this stuff you're building a couple stitches of stitching right now, and you're expecting even more to follow behind you, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people on the show today and listening in are investors, and I can tell you in Tampa, when we first set out on building Water Street, and we're in the planning stages of that, institutional capital didn't really exist in Tampa, certainly not at scale. And by institutional capital, I'm talking about, big investments coming, from major markets that are, backed by generally, larger groups of equity. And, after Water Street, in fact, even as Water Street was just coming out of the ground, that really stimulated. And there were a couple of other factors like COVID and like mass migration down to Florida, obviously, but that really helped stimulate institutional investment to the point where I can't tell you how many new projects are planned and proposed around downtown, not even downtown Tampa, but just right outside of downtown Tampa. I'd like to think that Water Street and the investment that was made there, by the investors, that project, that really helped clear a path for additional investment, which is necessary. I mean, to build these buildings, big, large buildings with a lot of residents, and then which helps create density in urban places. And there are so many great things about that. It takes capital, it takes equity from investors to be able to do that. And when you do it at a large scale, you need institutional development to be able to do it.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this number of 10,000 residents in an urban core, and building that capacity in order to have that to then tip the development to not need incentives and whatnot, and the need for visionaries to come in here and take a little bit of extra risk, a little bit of extra vision, right? Like have these like long-term incentives in place that make them want to actually do this stuff. And how lucky we are to have a group like JWB and DLP that is so committed long-term to the area doing this stuff. And it makes me think of what you told me on our onboarding call, right? Like this idea of Jacksonville being at this like tipping point. You want to expand a little bit on what we spoke about on our onboarding call about that?
Yeah, definitely. And it goes back to the comment that I made about institutional capital, but one of the reasons that I thought this would be a great opportunity for myself personally and professionally was that I saw so many similarities between, the different neighborhoods in DC and sort of, micro examples, if you will. And then more macro example would be in Tampa, where there are certain things that are coming together right now that I see in Jacksonville that we saw there. Having a large scale transformative project. We've got a few of those downtown, frankly, with what's going on in other places. Shad Khan and the Jaguars, Four Seasons under construction, likely future entertainment district down there. That by itself would be pretty amazing. But certainly with what we're doing around the central core, there are other developers that are doing some really great projects nearby too. In Tampa, there was sort of that groundswell that there was a lot of interest in doing things in areas like Jacksonville. Some projects that were planned and proposed just haven't kicked off yet. A lot of projects looking for capital out there. And then I'd be remiss to say that it's not just private investment, but what we saw as an example in Tampa was a significant amount of public investment. Mayor Buckhorn did a really amazing job of getting the waterfront in fantastic shape in downtown, and that's such an amenity with the Riverwalk and the investment around that. And the same thing's happening right now. You've got between Riverfront Plaza, what's going on where the Whole Foods is being built, the extension of the Riverwalk, then over to the shipyards, and then over to the stadium. that is just, I mean, it's, hundreds of millions of dollars of public investment. And we should talk about the Emerald Trail. I mean, that also has the ability to be incredible. Hogan's Creek, the work that's going to be being done by Groundworks Jacksonville on Hogan's Creek, just so much public investment that's happening downtown. And you really have to have both of those things come together. And when you're at that point, and not to mention 500 people a week moving to Jacksonville and business friendly and everyone, great quality of life, you have all of that plus all this investment, then you're at the tipping point. And I think that's where Jacksonville is right now, downtown.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more, man. Like, it's hard to, if you've lived in a couple of other cities, like you've had the good fortune of kind of like been in the thick of it 3 different times and like see the pattern recognition. I've had the good fortune of seeing it one time in my life, but it's really hard to argue against this idea that it looks like all the data points are all pointing towards this idea of like, man, we're looking at, if you want to think of a city like as a stock, I feel like we're looking at Apple right when they're coming out with the iPod, right? And the iPhone and the iPad and all this stuff is still coming. And it's really, really exciting. And we, I think this is the part on the show where we like to remind people that a lot of the investments that we're talking about right now are $1 million investments. They're for accredited investors. But the way that, and that's like the $500 table at the Bellagio, but like the way that you can get in on the $5 table and put a chip in is invest in this like workforce housing stock around the urban core that's going to benefit from the economic windfall that all this happens. Property prices are going to increase as median income increases, property prices increase, rent prices increase. So the single family workforce housing asset does really well. And if you want to do that, go to chatwithjwb.com to get that conversation started, because that's what JWB does. Economic development, man. I mean, what can you tell me about the Amazon HQ2 project? That seemed like a national, in the middle of like all media attention. I remember being in Miami working on that bid, and just like everybody was gunning for that. What'd you learn there?
Yeah, for sure. For those of you that know Northern Virginia and the Arlington, Crystal City area, Crystal City in particular had been hit really hard by a lot of macroeconomic changes, a lot of Class B office space that had been occupied for a very long time by defense contractors. BRAC happened, which is the Base Realignment Act, and took a lot of jobs out of Crystal City in the DC area and redistributed them into other markets. You had sort of major groups like the Patent Office that left Crystal City, and essentially had this, again, an area that had been very underinvested in for a long time. And Amazon had but there was a story, the company that I worked for then, JBG Smith, had vision about what this place could be by adding residential, having more ground floor retail, creating walkable spaces, all mixed in with the existing office. And, JBG Smith was able to convey that vision to Amazon. Amazon believed in it, and they decided to locate there. And, in part also because of the larger political climate with, the state of Virginia, or the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the city of Arlington, which are also very supportive of it going there. But in my, what my role in that transformation was about helping put all those things that I just mentioned, additional residential, ground floor retail, thinking through like what's a Class B office building going to look like in its next life, potentially, residential conversions, like those types of things. There was the JBG Smith controlled 80 acres immediately adjacent to the land that Amazon ended up going on, which JBG Smith sold to them. And, most of that, a vast majority of that was just, high vacancy Class B office. And so that was quite an undertaking, a lot different than, frankly, Tampa and what we're doing in Jacksonville, what Gateway JAX is doing in Jacksonville, where, you had to be very meticulous about what you're doing and there was a lot of existing infrastructure that we had to, to deal with. So that, again, there are a lot of similarities between a lot of the different experiences I've had, but that one was a a huge challenge because of just, it was very different than where we are now. And in that neighborhood, there's 4 new residential buildings, over 2,000 units that are delivering over the next year, 100,000 plus square feet of new retail, new public spaces, new parks. So it's a lot of it has delivered or is under construction. When I go up to visit there, it's fun to go see it.
It's got to be cool to be you and be able to like go back to these cities and see the you're a city builder going back to like see your kid grow up in the wild, right? Like is that kind of the experience you get to kind of like see this stuff play out in real time?
Yeah, 100%. My not to get too sentimental, but my dad was a bricklayer, and one of the very eye-opening things I thought when I was a little kid, and I told you earlier on the onboarding, I was drawing cities on pieces of paper.
Yeah.
He went around and we were driving around a neighborhood, and he went to 10 different houses of the houses that he laid the brick on. And I thought, whoa, like that is so cool that he did something that is actually going to be there for, 100+ years. And that really stuck with me. So yeah, every time I see a building or a project that I was involved in, it really, it's worth taking a moment, when that happens.
That's a great story, man. Just in that story, I just think about how awesome America is. Like out of a bricklayer to then city builder, developer, right? Like that's a cool snapshot of all that, man. And the feeling that comes with it's the beauty of like the construction industry, right? Like the development, construction, architecture, and design industry. It's like the permanence of the projects that you get to build are things that most other lines of work don't get to go back and experience it in that way. That's exciting. Right. A couple questions from the crowd. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, man. Michael Santoris asks, it looks like the project is planned to start in phases with groundbreaking in 2024. How many years do you anticipate the project to take?
So right now we're assuming it's going to be about 10 plus or minus years. Market conditions, of course, are a big factor in that, but it is accurate. We're starting the first phase in 2024. We're already thinking about our second phase and what that could be, but I think the most important thing is to get phase 1 done right. So our attention is very focused on that, but we also want to be ready, when we're under construction on phase 1 and that's going, we want to be, thinking about advancing phase 2, because we want to take advantage of the momentum and the investment behind that. So, sequentially and not so linearly, we will have these phases. I think it would be unfortunate from an investment standpoint if we waited until the first phase was totally done and stabilized before we even thought about or started phase 2. So the idea is to continue to do that, again, pending market conditions, to do that over time. Again, once Pearl Street and the Pearl District are on their way under construction, we'll start looking at other phases. But 10 plus years, it's 22 acres. It's a lot of property. The first phase, part of 5 city blocks, also about 5.5 acres. So, and not every phase, as I'm calling them, is going to be the same scale. Some of them might actually be a little bit larger. Others will probably be a little bit, slightly relatively smaller, but all of our projects are likely to be of some scale and not individual projects.
Awesome. All right. Nadeem Shah is asking, is there a plan to bring in a casino if allowed by city and state?
I've been to Vegas. I have a good time gambling, but I don't think we're going to be having any casinos, at least in our projects.
Makes sense to me, man. I second that. I like Vegas and I like to gamble. All right. Lee is asking, is Bryan as excited about the new autonomous mass transit going on in this JAX upgrade? How tied into that are you, man? Are you familiar with like the autonomous vehicle corridor, and does that go into your planning and things that you guys think about?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical that Jacksonville have a mass transit component, especially as we start to grow the downtown. No one wants to sit in traffic all the time, and to have the ability for people to take other forms of transit or other forms of mobility, whether it be walking, biking, carpooling, car sharing, or certainly something like mass transit or autonomous vehicles. I'm supportive of almost any and all forms of public transit to help provide additional forms of mobility. I know there's some debate as to whether or not autonomous vehicles are the right, path or not. And, I'll leave that for others to debate. But again, I'm definitely pro transit.
Heck yeah, man. Bryan, this is awesome, man. Like I really appreciate this conversation. I love the forward thinking. I'm a big fan of the skill set and outlook you bring to the table, and especially accentuated with that whole story of like drawing cities as a kid, son of a bricklayer, all that good stuff, man. I'm really, really grateful to get to have a front row seat for this thing, man. And I'm really grateful that you're the guy driving the bus. So thank you for coming to the show. Anything else that you want to share, ways to find you, ways to help, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I are, recently spending a significant amount of time in Jacksonville. We're relatively new, but I'm getting involved in a lot of different groups and industry, industry associations. So I anticipate I'll be around a lot more, and I'm excited to to meet more people. And always feel free to reach out to me if you have a question.
Cool. What's a good avenue for that? LinkedIn, email? What's a good one?
LinkedIn's great. Yeah.
Cool, man. So we'll tag you on the in the podcast distribution notes. Thanks for coming. I want to thank the community. We had 60 plus people here asking great questions, being a part of all of this stuff. Never goes unnoticed that you take an hour out of your day to be a part of this conversation and to add context to this stuff and ask the great questions and be here. So thank you for being here on
Thanks,
Thursday.
Pablo.
Yeah, no.
I was just going to thanks, Pablo. Thanks to everyone that was able to join. Thanks to JWB. I really appreciate it.
Dude, I'm sure that we're all grateful to have you here, man. As investors, as residents here, JWB as like a person putting their money in it as well, right? We're all grateful to have you here. I want to invite everybody that's here. On Thursday, we have a special edition. We are doing a preview of our real estate investing class. So you'll get a little sneak peek if you haven't taken the class, or if you've seen it. We're going to have Cody and Madison doing a ladies lunch and learn. It's a special edition here of the Not Your Average Investor Show on Thursday. So I hope you show up. And from now until then, the one thing that I ask is to not be average.